All right, hey everyone, welcome to the debate video for NUDC 2023 National Judge Test. Welcome, my name is Omar, part of the Adjudication Corps, and we're here to record the debate under the motion of this House supports the implementation of performance-based funding metrics for public universities. That said, before we start, for speakers, please make sure you indicate your preferred method of accepting VOIs before you deliver your speech, so you're not interrupted in ways you do not want to, either via chat or unmute, raise hand, or any feature there is. So secondly, we highly encourage everyone to time themselves. I believe my colleague Feli will help with the timing, but just in case one of us gets disconnected, we know where to reconvene if you also have your own timing. All right, that being said, we can start the debate. So I call upon the Prime Minister. Here.
Thank you. POI preference, just unmute. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Chair and panel, I feel like the education system right now in Indonesia is corrupted. We think that there should be more policy to eventually make the budget or the funding that we have as the Minister of Education should be more effective and efficient. So what will happen under our side? We will support the performance-based funding metrics to public university with where we will give significant amount based on the goal achieved by this public university. The goals would eventually be diverse. Number one, it can be the average graduates earning, for example, the enrollment number in the university, or the program completion rate. The way we mechanize this will be going into 3 ways. Number one, we think that implementation or the standardized of the goals achieved based on university would eventually be proportionate based on, number one, how big the university is, like how many majors that they have. Number two, based on the location of the university, but lastly, based on the history as well. So if your university is right now is eventually bigger or older or more famous, then you will have bigger goals or higher goals compared to a smaller public university. But number two, the goals will be set by the government based on the auditing, based on the performance that this current university have in the past, and we'll see how well they perform, and we'll give them a specific goals to achieve. But lastly, we will also do constant evaluation or auditing, for example. So it will be audited based on quarterly or per 6 months, just to see how much progress that they have. This mechanism is to preempt the arguments coming from opposition mentioning that it might be unfair for bigger university because they might achieve more. We will give them bigger goals so it will be okay. So what will happen under our side and why we think this is important?
On the model CO?
Yeah. CO?
Right. But on your end, bigger universities will get bigger budgets. Smaller universities, even if they achieve their goal, will get smaller budgets. Is that true?
Okay, no. The amount of goals is eventually based on, for example, 0 to 100. So if they get 700 of the goal achieved, they will have 7% of the amount. So it's not based on how big your university and how big your funding. The funding will be the same, but it will be proportionate to the goal achieved per university. So I will give you 2 arguments under my case. Number one, what is the urgency and why, as the Ministry of Education, you need to do this? Number two, why then we think it's eventually fair and we will give a better development toward the public university in the first place. So first arguments, why we think this is justified for the Ministry of Education to do this. 2 layers. First, I will explain the current status quo. Right now, all public university will eventually get the same budget that, like all the same funding to each university that exists in Indonesia. The problem right now is that this funding that is given towards this public university does not motivate this university to eventually do better or eventually perform better, right? Because when you already get the funding, the system might be corrupted. There's no push for you to become better. The only auditing right now that happened in the education system is just based on auditing, based on what is the top ranked university that exists in Indonesia, but then there's no like for university that's less performing, there's no push for them to eventually be better. And second of all, I feel like this is important for the Ministry of Education, because when you're as the ministry right now, you also need to have a higher you need to create a performance as your like certificate of how good your ministry works in the end of the day. We think it is eventually justified for this Ministry of Education to fund this bigger university, because in the end of the day, if they eventually work better, then this achievement are the one that they will showcase in the end of like the year when they show it to the president and stuff. So I think this is important for the Ministry of Education to like support a higher performing university. But second layer, and the most important one, why we think this is eventually fair and why this will create a better development towards public university. Right now, first layers, right? Right now, what happened in public university and a lot of university that is less performing, for example, is they're already given funding by the government. But the problem with that funding is that it is not allocated efficiently or effectively. For example, number one, right now there's a lot of university that eventually got the funding, but they don't eventually invest in students that want to go to like a competition, for example, debate competition. They don't want to give a proper training, for example. This eventually be caused by number one, the system is corrupted. Maybe like there's eventually people in the rectorate or in the faculty that eventually take the money. Or number two, even if the budget is not corrupted, it might not be used efficiently. For example, they use a lot of budget for the dinner of faculty member, for example, or funding for like an event that might not eventually be like correlated with any sort of performance or any club or any kind of learning system within that university. So lastly, we think that the budget they do not allocate enough budget, or they don't eventually use the budget effective enough to build the infrastructure inside the universities. For example, building the library, giving books, for example, or eventually creating a better student clubs room for the students to eventually train, right? And why we think this is eventually good under our side, because on our side, we will give them the push to eventually use their budget effectively, right? For example, on how they will eventually allocate the funding to our students club, for example, or number two, they will be the process of evaluating whether the budget will be effective or efficient enough will be eventually being overviewed again by the member of the university, because they want the money to begin with, right? It can go to the professor will eventually get much more training, because right now there's a pressure towards this professor to eventually teach better and eventually make their student eventually more performing, because they need to graduate better with a better earning, for example. But number two, it is also a push for this university to work with a lot of job searching job searching company, for example. They will eventually want to use the prakerja system that already exists right now in the status quo, because eventually under opposition, if there's no push, then there's no also like a push for the university to help their student getting more jobs when they're graduating. It can go to a lot of benefit, but we think that evaluating the system right now and how then you will eventually be able to eventually funding the university in the first place would eventually work better, right? Because in both sides, funding will still exist, but it depends on how much funding that you will get next year based on this proposal. So we think the only way for you to evaluate and make your uni system better will happen under opening government. How to propose.
All right, I thank the Prime Minister for that speech. To continue on, I call upon the leader of opposition here.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Is my voice is audible?
Your voice is audible. Is that possible for us to see you?
Wait. Oh, okay. Wait. Oh, okay. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Today, I, as the leader of the opposition, will start my speak in 3, 2, 1. For the POI, just chat in the chat box. And so we as the opposition team is opposed to this motion that this house is in support that the implementation of the performance-based funding metrics for public universities. The performance-based funding metrics applied to universities also face specific challenges and drawbacks. some key issue that we gather about this problem is, first one is this metric can limit the focus on the outcomes. So performance-based funding metrics for the universities is often prioritized on the specific outcomes, such as graduation, score tests, and while this metric is provide with the valuable information, they may not capture the full range of the university mission and impact. The second problem is this metric can neglecting different mission and specialization. There's a variation of the universities in the Indonesia, even in the world, with the variety of the missions and goals and areas and specialization. The performance-based funding metrics often fail to account for this variation, leading to a one-size-fits-all approach that may not align with the unique characteristic of the universities. The third problem is disincentivize for serving disadvantaged students. These metrics that focus on the graduation or jobs placement may inadvertently create disincentivize for universities to enroll and support students from disadvantaged background. This can also say to the universities that more afraid to take the risk and innovation, because when universities are financially rewarded by this government funded based on the meeting paradigm metric, they may become risk averse and hesitant to explore new ideas or experiment the new approach. Innovation often involves inherent uncertainty and failure, and a rigid performance by the funding system can discourage universities from taking necessary risks, stressing and creativity and progress. And the fourth problem, this is inadequate measurement of teaching quality. The performance-based funding metrics often rely on the quantitative indicator to assess the teaching quality, such as student evaluation or completion rates. However, this measure is syphilis. Okay, no, but I use my case building in the Word that then I print it. Sorry, because then where's I left, and five problem is like the broader government context. This can make a change to cheat the system. So the government, the universities that's with the connection or to the government that can gaming the system, so they got more funded by the government they knew. And maybe the last problem is this can be the problem with the academic autonomy, because if the government have the metrics to predominantly make the universities is they dictate universities to do to get some metrics that will undermine the university's academic autonomy itself. So maybe that's all problem that I opposition team that can say that's make us is really oppose that this motion that this house is in support of the implementation of the performance-based funding metrics for public universities. That's all, and thank you.
All right, thank you, Leader of Opposition, for the speech. I call upon Deputy Prime Minister. Here.
Hi, am I audible? Oh, yeah.
Yep, you are.
Okay, audible. Okay. Preferred pronoun she, they. Preferred PRI methods through the chat. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The framing of this debate is whether this new implementations fulfills the goal of making sure public university ends up being an accessible, good quality education. And if as long as OG can prove this, we're able to win this debate. This framing is important to set early on because we do not think OO has yet to prove this, whether or not this implementation is harmful, right? All they've mentioned to you that performance is harmful and everything, but two reasons why we can immediately frame up their case. A, sure, this implementation is not going to be, this system is not going to be 100% perfect, but we have yet to see any clear harms exclusive on their side. But if the question is about performance, I'll rebut it and we're going to show you why this thing still makes sense. But B, in the end of the day, O still has the burden to explain what is then the solution for all of the harms that my Prime Minister has told you. And if they cannot prove that, we think that we take the opening half, right? Three rebuttals towards opening opposition. First of all, they tell you that what happens if the university they tell us that the harm of this implementation is that university goals cannot be fulfilled. We question why. There are three reasons why this claim on their side does not make sense. Reason one, my Prime Minister has already told you that the goals is going to be clear general university goals, right? Which is, ensure the students get good education, later on get a good career, right? So if as long as these are the things achieved by the university to ensure the students get that, we're pretty sure that's a good established university in and of itself, and that's the kind of university that deserves funding, right? But second reason, if the concern coming from OO is generalization of the goals in and of itself, we've already told you that it is going to be subjective based on the geographic and the history of the university itself, right? Of course, a university in the greater Jakarta region will not have the same goals as later some of the smaller public universities in certain regions and everything, right? So if they say is that, oh, not all goals can fit all the university, we tell you that's not the case. Please engage with my Prime Minister, and that's why this harm falls, right? Third reason, they tell you, oh, there are certain personal goals of the university that cannot be achieved. We are willing to trade off certain personal goals of university if it means it harms the actual main goal of making sure that the students are actually facilitated by this university, right? For an example, universities that have the personal aim to be the best research publisher, but neglect the students from other faculties that might not be this researchers and everything, we do not think it's that urgent to fulfill this personal goal. So if that is what's glorified by OO, we do not think it's going to be that urgent, this debate. We've gladly trade that off, right? Second rebuttal, they tell you quantitative is bad. First of all, this not the entire process is going to be quantitative based. It's not going to be a test. When you're actually evaluating performance, you still need the qualitative part of the evaluation, interviewing alumni and etc. So we do not think this farm stands. But in the worst, but we do bite the bullet. There's going to be a certain level of a more quantitative weighing. But we think this is necessary to make because in status quo there is no clear budget allocation because of the lack of parameter that is set, right? Only with this mechanism we've proposed to you, there is now a justification for the ministry to set a certain budget allocation. What my Prime Minister has already explained to you, still neglected by OO, right? Lastly, last rebuttal before going on to my extension on worst case analysis from either side of the house, right? Because on OO and the burden on the entire opposition bench is to explain all of the harms my Prime Minister has told you, things such as corruption by these universities who do not necessarily see the need to evaluate themselves and unequal funding and everything. This is the worst case, and we think as long as there is no solution in status quo as one that we've proposed to you in OG, this still exists, right? On the worst case scenario of our side is that if these universities underperform and does not fulfill their goals, that is still going to be okay because they still do get the budget, but just lesser on their own. But they think this is a necessary evil because this is the only way they're going to actually improve for the better. Always out of this debate. Taking one from CEO, go.
Need clarity on the model. How are you going to determine schools that comes from small schools, small universities from geographically underprivileged places are going to be whose goals are going to be like, and what is the difference then with schools like, for example, in privileged areas?
Time's up. Initially, we're going to use the existing information we have now, which is what based on their performance currently, what can they actually achieve. Yeah, over time, we've told you why this re-evaluation can happen, and we think, and that's already that's already enough to fulfill that, right? My extension will tell you how then public universities are able to evaluate themselves, right? This directly extends from Prime Minister on ensuring why then these public universities needs to continuously be checked and balanced by the government, right? Because public universities should be the most accessible tertiary education because private universities can vary. This is the only one that is government funded, right? So this extension is going to be structured in what are the problems in status quo and how then we can fix it exclusively by this motion, right? First problem is that certain public universities seen as prestigious or big universities, as CO would call them, is just because of their name or because they've been around for ages, giving them an unfair advantage, right? And this causes the problem where students want to enter university just for the name or just because they're seen big and established, not necessarily based on the major they want to take or the performance prospect that actually comes out of that, right? This is because currently in status quo, the evaluation of funding from getting towards these universities or sponsors or whatever is based on how they look, not necessarily on the performance they gave, right? And this is why a lot of students end up going to certain universities just to take that specific name credential, not necessarily for the major that they want, ended up either getting a job in a different field, jobless, or they switch majors halfway through anyways, which is not effective budget allocation in the other day, right? This is solved by our side of the house when we're able to tell you that when performance is actually lowered, when students aren't succeeding in the major that they're supposed to, this is how then universities evaluate the way how that they are marketed in society and how that they eventually accept students, right? Second problem in status quo is on the lack of support to student-based programs, right? The problem in status quo is that many student-based programs are underfunded because this is something that university does not see directly necessary for them, right? Even though in the end of the day, this is what creates performance, that the students get achievement, but they also get soft skills like help them get better careers, right? So how then the mechanism on our side will target more of students? Because first of all, because this is how then the university sees that the performance directly contingent based on how the students join these programs or these extracurricular activities in the end will make them have better performance when they're in careers and getting high paying jobs and everything. This is how then the university will target more of these student-based programs and get them better. The last problem that happens in status quo is about how then the students is going to be the center of attention of these universities, which does not happen in status quo because most universities end up having their own personal goals as OO champions, right? This is how then universities will ensure that each of the students are better included financially, structurally, or even emotionally, making sure students don't drop out from the stars. Proud to propose.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for the speech. To close the opening half of the debate, I call upon the Deputy Leader of Opposition, here.
Yep. All right. I'll go by he, him pronouns, but you should probably just call me DLO. And taking POIs verbally, starting my speech. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Public universities were never about outcomes. They were about giving a chance to students that needed it and deserved it. Side OO stands for a world where universities do not see the investment into students as an opportunity cost, but rather an investment into the future of those students themselves. That's why we're very proud to stand on opening opposition. Just one strategic mistake that I'd like to call out from OG's side of the house. I'd like to note that most of OG's case is actually purely dependent on the absolute worst case scenario, because note that their entire mechanism in first that they give you is literally corruption. Let's be charitable and assume that this is the case. Their case is mitigated solely on the fact that it only applies to universities which are corrupt, which even if we are being charitable, probably isn't the vast majority of universities in the first place. So that mitigates a lot of OG's like practical case. Two clashes then that I want to analyze in my speech. First of all, how does this affect universities? And second, is this actually principally just policy? First, on the first clash then, how does this actually affect universities? And OG would have you believe that performance-based funding metrics incentivize universities to become better. And I have two responses to this. First of all, I want to note that this mechanism of government funding is completely self-defeating, because crucially, if it is true that universities are truly bad and they do not provide their students with enough funding to fund their debate competitions and stuff like that, then that problem is literally exacerbated under their side of the house. Because we tell you that on their side of the house, at a point where these universities do not get more funding, then they can't even invest into things like student facilities or better paid professors or funding student competitions and stuff like that. Bad universities who actually need the funding get worse under their side of the house because they do not have the capability to actually cater to students in the first place. So I'm not sure why these universities are likely to get better, given that they basically cut most of their funding and they lower the capacity for these students to for these universities to actually cater to students. But second, we would posit that even without the threat of funding, universities still have incentives to get better under our side of the house, right? Because universities care about their own reputation. They don't just care about like the amount of money that they're getting in, because most of that money is used on providing to students and like teachers anyway. They care about the kinds of students that enroll. It is really just not the case that when universities have really bad graduation rates, they have no incentive at all to fix that. We tell you that either way, public universities still want to get better under either side of the house, because if they are truly bad and they have truly bad enrollment rates and graduation rates, then that hurts their reputation and hurts their professors and all of that. But their next claim is that you get less corruption, so you get better student facilities. And I have two responses here. First of all, note that this is absolutely worst case, like I pointed out in like strategic mistakes. So just pointing out that this is really a charitable characterization from their side of the house. But second, we told you that if it was the case that their side had such prevalent corruption, then this was still going to happen on their side by actually creating unfair metrics that were good for some universities and some and bad for others. This was analysis that Allo gave you, that this like this whole system could be undermined under their side of the house if that was the characterization that they wanted to posit. Because at the end of the day, these were all arbitrary metrics, right? It meant that you could game the system if that was truly the case, that corruption was very prevalent under both sides of the house. On Wing then, why does OO take this clash? We think that on our side of the house, the delta is very clear. On both sides of the house, you get on both sides of the house, bad universities exist, but incentive structures for them to improve do exist. The win then goes to the side who can prove that universities can actually get better. On our side of the house, when universities have stable funding, they do not have to worry about the opportunity cost of providing to students. Universities are actually able to get better because they don't have that funding cut. They're more able to like provide for these student facilities and stuff like that. On their side of the house, yes, maybe you do want to get better as a university because you want to get your funding back, but you don't have the capability or the capacity to like fund your professors or like fund student opportunities and stuff like that. That means that on their side of the house, bad universities simply get worse. That's why we take this clash. But second clash shortly on, is this actually principally fair? And our LO actually told you that this policy was purely dependent on outcomes, right? It meant that you only focused on outcomes which were beyond a university's control. And let me expand that a little bit, because crucially, the reason why OO thought that this was principally unfair was because things like graduate earnings or program completion rates, like PM told you, could not be purely attributed to the quality of staff at that university. No matter how good the quality of your teaching and facilities was, it was ultimately up to the life choices of your students and their life decisions, whether or not they were able to fulfill these metrics in the first place. Because all these things were out of university control, this was a principally unjust policy. We got absolutely no response from OG. But what did they tell you? OG tried to justify this policy by saying all public universities have the same funding, but not all universities operate with the same level of quality. And I have two responses. First of all, we can concede that yes, maybe this is true, but this was not a fair metric to judge universities on. Even if it is true, they cannot tell you whether one university is better than another just based on the outcomes. Because maybe the worst performing university actually only takes on like really underprivileged students who aren't as academically achieving as better performing universities. No matter what, this outcome-based system is not a fair way to judge the quality of universities. But second, we would posit that the entire point of funding universities in the first place is not to incentivize them to get better. It is just to give them the resources that they need to teach their students. Because these were public universities, the government already trusts them enough to give them funding in the first place. This was not meant to be a carrot on a stick panels. It was meant to be the funding that allowed students to thrive on university facilities. Their side violates this whole principle. Why is this round winning for OO? Because we give you the exclusive analysis as to why side government is principally unjust for the public university system. We told you why this was a morally abhorrent thing to do, and that's why we actually take this clash. All right, then, moving to my extension then, sure. Why is this actually worse for students of lower socioeconomic standing? And I think that on the entire government bench, right, universities simply become a lot more exclusive and discriminatory when it comes to their enrollment methods. And this is the case for two reasons. One, understand that on their side of the house, public universities are a lot more competitive. Understand that when you know that you don't have a secure or stable source of funding, and the fact that your funding is a zero-sum game because the government doesn't just have like infinite capacity to fund all these universities, it means that you have a lot more incentive to try and keep costs low while maximizing the opportunity to profit from the success of your students. But second, I think that on their side of the house, The incentive structure of universities is incredibly bad because universities are less likely to take risks on students. They don't think of the benefits that they give to the students. They think of the costs and returns that students might make for the university. That is to say that on their side of the house, not only do universities become extremely selfish in their incentive structures, universities have a lot more incentive to maximize profits while keeping costs low in terms of providing to students. The impact of this is that on their side of the house, universities are a lot more exclusive in their enrollment methods, right? And universities on their side of the house are extremely bad because they're less likely to take risks on underprivileged students, because these students are the least likely to give them the biggest returns. These students are the least likely to give them the most efficient returns for every dollar spent on these students. We tell you that the underprivileged students who actually need this education in the first place are severely damaged under this side of the house when they implement this policy and they incentivize universities to only enroll the most academically gifted students and the most rich students who are likely to succeed in the first place. For all those reasons, very proud to stand on opening opposition.
All right, I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition for that speech. Two reminders, everyone, we're not going to take notes for everything that is said after 7 minutes and 15 seconds. Secondly, please accept at least one POI to increase engagement in the debate. That would also make the debate more exciting. That said, I call upon the member of government here.
Hi, I'm a member of government. I don't have any specific gender pronoun, and for POI, please unmute yourself. Okay, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Ladies and gentlemen, in my speech, I'm going to talk about two main things. One, I'm going to discuss about natural incentive and externalities, which is something that is constantly brought by the second speaker of the opening opposition. Secondly, I'm going to discuss about equitable metrics for tertiary educations. This is something that has been missing from the debate. The debate in the opening side only touch the surface ideas about what is a good education, but never did they discuss about what is a good tertiary education. That is exactly why we're going to specify this, why this metrics is important to create an equitable solution specifically for tertiary educations. Now, let's jump directly into my first thing about natural incentive to be better and externalities. The opening opposition argue that the universities themselves have the natural incentive to be better to accommodate their students, without even explaining to you why this natural incentive will decrease with the performance-based metric system. Because if the universities are that good and they care really, they care a lot about their students in the very first place, because that's why they want to take care of their students, the performance-based metric will not change that, because these performance-based metrics are all centralized around the students themselves. That's why the idea of enrollment numbers means how many students you can take care under your universities, or the average graduate earnings centralized around their students and how can they take care of themselves, no thank you, or the program completion rate means how exactly a students can complete your program without wasting any more money and time in your universities. That's exactly why the natural incentive to accommodate the students would not be decreased under our mechanism. But more importantly, in our side of the house, we reward universities, because that is the framing of opening opposition, is that this is some sort of punishment for universities. No, this is a reward for universities who really care about their students and making sure that they have good life after they graduate from the universities. Lastly, on this topic is about externalities, because they said that graduate earnings, completion rates, and everything, no thank you, are all externalities. No, all metrics have data as a basis, and universities already have enough information and sources to know that their condition will affect the graduate earnings in the future, for example, because they know how outdated their curriculums are, for example, in status quo, and how it does not match the reality in the workplace, for example, or how exactly the number of lecturers, for example, are not sufficient to taking care of other students. That's why the completion rates are going down, for example, and that's why they need to innovate. And all of this information are readily available for universities, so lack of externalities does not exist. But assuming so that there are externalities, that this is beyond the university's control, that is exactly why we should reward universities who took an extra steps and effort to minimize externalities. And that is what is missing in status quo, where universities are giving us giving the same reward, and other universities who took an extra effort does not get any financial reward from the government, we think this is completely justified. Moving on to my second topic about equitable metrics for tertiary education. But before that, is there any question? No, I
Right,
don't see
just
it.
making sure.
Sure, yeah.
CO.
Theo, go ahead.
Making sure. So on your end, assuming that these universities achieve their goal, small universities achieve their goal, the amount of funding that is allocated to small universities, will it be the same or as big as the amount that the bigger universities will have if they achieve their goal?
That's the basic question for opening government. I'm not going to repeat that. Secondly, about equitable metrics for tertiary educations. What we mean by equitable. Equitable does not mean that we give the same apple to everybody, right? That's the definition. That means that everyone who fulfills our criteria will get more money, will get rewarded, by having more fundings provided to them. Why this is equitable and how this can break the chain of privileged universities versus underprivileged universities. Ladies and gentlemen, performance-based metrics will be the one that creates check and balance for the now so-called privileged universities. Let's analyze what makes privileged universities now privileged in the first place, especially in Indonesia, but applicable in other parts of the world as well. It is exactly prestige, family traditions, and other unquantifiable metrics that creates and makes them privileged universities in the first place. It is something that they have built over the years and remains unchallenged. There are no quantifiable metrics set by the government on what is a good universities and what are bad universities. And that's why some privileged universities keep getting students over the year. They keep getting donations from their alumni network, for example, to fund these privileged universities because they rely on something unchallenged and unquantified as prestige, family connection, family tradition, and that's how a lot of students keep applying to these privileged universities, and they look down on other smaller and remote universities, for example. And that is exactly why by creating a performance-based metrics, we create a publicly available data and information to the public. Like, look, these privileged universities, the famous one right now, may not qualify for our fundings because their systems are outdated, they do not take care of students, and etc. And these smaller universities, they can fulfill this particular metrics, and that's why you need to send your kids, for example, to these universities. And that's how we can create a counter narrative, which we cannot assume just because some universities are small, they will not be able to fulfill this performance-based metrics. Next, second of all, ladies and gentlemen, what if in the worst case scenario, some universities are closed? We say this is completely fine because that means these universities are not adaptive and change quickly to accommodate their students. That's what differentiates primary and tertiary educations. Primary education's purpose is to make sure we give equal access to everybody. Everyone needs to have the same basic level of understanding of a certain materials. But tertiary educations is one step further. It's something that you need to very, very careful to give your fundings into. It's completely okay to cut down because that means they do not serve their tertiary purpose, because these students understand math already, but what kind of university that can excel their students' ability not only to understand math, but apply this math to their workplace. And that's exactly why the purpose of tertiary education can only be accommodated and can only be rewarded for universities that fulfills the performance-based funding metrics in our case. And that is it. And lastly, we're also going to argue that it's completely fine to have less number of universities in a country, because right now, especially in Indonesia, there are a lot of universities that are not student-centric. They do not really apply their values, and they do not allocate their fundings to their students. And that is exactly what we want to break by this student-based, performance-based funding metrics that centralize and revolves around the livelihood of the students. On all of these reasons, we are very proud to propose this motion.
I thank the member of government for the speech. I call upon the member of opposition. Here.
Hello. Setting up my timer. The first QI method is through tab. I take one later. Is my voice now audible, or the background noise still kind of big?
A bit muffled, but should be good.
Yeah, should be audible, yeah. Okay, let me know if it's not audible. I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Closing opposition stands for a world in which university serves its purpose not to prepare individuals to be a cog in a bigger system of oppressive capitalism, but to ensure that individuals are able to fulfill their fullest potential, actualize their intellects, and ensures they're able to learn as much as they want to. We think underprivileged institutions are the ones who are mostly going to be harmed because their lack of access, uh, lack of access. But we also think that individuals who would want to pursue education for the sake of education will completely be obliterated because this model is going to change the landscape of tertiary education to be focused more on capitalistic majors. Majors will focus on earnings. Majors ensure that individuals work as hard as they can, hustle to graduate on time, for example, just so they can prepare to work for the rest of their life, not being able to learn at their own pace. CO believes that learning is personal, and that's why we oppose. Two arguments. One, we believe that quantification of education in university betrays the function of education. And secondly, why it's principally unjust for government to be the one who set these goals, especially in institutions in which education failed because of their failure in the past. First argument, directly engaging to both OG and CD. Why quantification of education in universities betrays the function and goal of education? We think that the first argument from CO would take OG out of this debate because we believe that uni's education is not to prepare you for work, but for the sake of increasing knowledge. But before I move on, sure, CG.
That's the focus of primary educations. The focus of tertiary educations is to make sure that your students can afford the life to explore their passion in the future. And that's why this motion should stand.
The focus of primary education is to teach you basic education that everyone needs for them to be a functional human being. Tertiary education ensures that you want to learn what you want, to explore your passions, and to be the intellectually fulfilled human being that more dignified, more enlightened, etc. I'm gonna explain to you later. Before I move on, right? Because why then? Why this also I guess directly engages to CGPOI, I guess. Why it tertiary education increases knowledge. Three things. One, because it gives you agency to learn. How universities operate is different from primary education, because we are not given a set of curriculum that is, rigid. For example, we are given more agency in understanding what kind of knowledge that we want to explore. Right? This looks like, for example, you having the agency to choose, learn how to learn philosophy, even though it does not necessarily have huge, capital potential in the future. Or the fact that you have the agency to choose what kind of classes you want, even though you're a, technique major, but you can learn communications or whatsoever. Or the fact that you are given the agency to, explore different passions in college that are not restricted, for example, as you were in primary school. This means it's because you as an individual has the ability to explore and in what way is best for you to explore your individuality to be a full human being in the future. That's why it's different. And I think CG should be kicked out as well because CG's definition of tertiary education sounds more like vocational schools, right? Sounds more like whether you are able, for example, to be applicative and to be prepared, for example, to earn money in the future, which I think serves different purpose because vocational school is designed, for example, for you to learn, but university serves a specific purpose to enrich and enlighten and explore knowledge, for example, for the sake of accumulating knowledge for the human being in itself. Why then it's bad when this model comes? This model decreases this agency. This means that universities now has the calculus and the incentive to shift the focus from allowing individuals to explore now to ensure that they are, have go-to majors that have bigger potential to earn money in the future, for example, or ensures that individuals do not go past 5 years or 6 years, 4 years, for example, so that they can get a bigger goal or achieve a bigger bonus in the future at the end of the day, because they feel like that's the proper graduating time at the end of the day. What I'm trying to say is that it takes away individuals' agency on how they want to learn and what they want to learn, because most of the time, then students are pressured to not pick majors like philosophy or communications, for example, that does not create lots earnings, or that they are not allowed, for example, to not go beyond a specific timeline. This is bad, not just for self-actualization that I explained earlier, but because it also decreases research, for example, in the future regarding how individuals would react. This looks like the abundance of STEM graduates that most likely would accumulate, for example, creating AI that infringes copyright, or while at the comparative that ethics does not necessarily evolve to catch up, for example, with the evolution of STEM. Or, for example, this creates horribleness of, for example, that not only that individuals are, it creates stigma, for example, for people who might not want to learn or fulfill, for example, what is deemed as right by universities, because the abundance and popularity of individuals who want to join these high achieving or high capital earning degrees are more likely going to stigmatize individuals who want to join them, creating allowing us to regress in terms of our education journey. That's why we think it's bad. Why then? Why then this is important? This is important because the comparative on opposite, we have funding this not based on performance, but it's fairer. It allows for individuals on our side to necessarily explore. The progress that we have currently in status quo shows that there is stigma that is currently being broken and allowing individuals to necessarily learn more than what they have, allowing them to gain this happiness that they get, for example, from learning something new. The process of unlearning is hard on opposition, but we think this is the right time, and anything else would just jeopardize that progress. Second argument, right? Why in order to help more universities, there needs to be given more budget, and what Gov doing is inherently immoral. One, I think it's unfair because at the end of the day, there is no assurance, right, as to how they're going to achieve these goals themselves. But more importantly, we think that in the past, why schools fail is because there is, lack of action from government. That looks like racism in the past to prevent historically Black schools to get good education, or the lack of access to proper infrastructure prevents schools in Papua to prosper. Understanding that it's unfair then for government to dangle a goal in front of their eyes, asking them to increase their performance based on a model that government arbitrarily decides. After historically stripping them of the ability to grow and develop, it's unfair then for you to say that you need to grow certain amount, for example, and then I will give you more funding. What needs to happen is that on our side is that there needs to be allocation of funding that is more proper and fairer based on the conditions that are currently happening to ensure that these schools have the capital to grow first before then therefore and then, for example, they need to be given access to government to prosper very properly.
All right, I thank the member of opposition for the speech. To close the case on the government bench, I call upon the government whip. Here.
Okay, hi everyone. For the my preferred gender pronoun is she or her. You can give me a POI through chat or through raising your hand. Timer. All right. I will start my speech in 3, 2, 1. So what is the goal of tertiary education, right? The goal of tertiary education is to, first of all, learn more advanced knowledge after you already get what you need to know through primary education, right? But then second of all, and most importantly, tertiary education is to prepare students for the job field, whichever they are going to enter the industry, whichever they are going to enter later on, whether it is the industry or also the academia. How do you prepare them, right? You prepare them through a set of standard. You prepare them for the rough world out there that is very based on performance, right? Like in job field later on, you will be given KPI and also you will be given OKR, right? So how do you prepare these kids in order to get to that job field, right? You need to make sure that they have like a certain standard to fulfill, right? What happened in the opposition bench is that you have a bunch of kids who just want to learn, which by the way, they never really show of how these kids have the incentive to learn by themselves. I mean, look at us, not all of us graduate on time. So like, I don't understand why, like without these standards, then it's, like, that these kids have the incentive to perform great. How do we know that how do we know that students will achieve great? Is that if we motivate, if we put a certain standard towards the university, and therefore like that effect will also trickle down. And I understand that there is a concern from the opposition bench that that will create a discriminatory system, but I will address that later on in my speech. So I think there's two issues in this debate, right? First of all, how do we make sure that there's a high quality tertiary education? But then second of all, we're also going to talk about like systematic privilege and everything like that, right? So, okay, like the concern of the opposition bench is that this will disincentivize university to help disadvantaged student, and it will make them discriminatory, right? But then first of all, I don't understand that in their case, what is the motivation of university to not be discriminatory? Because as much like as we know right now, university is already sort of discriminatory, right? Because if university is the way that you characterize them, that university already care about how they look, that they care about the prestige, right? What happened is that either they also like choose the highest performing people, or also if they care about prestige and care about money, that they would choose like the people with rich dad and rich moms, right? So like or maybe famous moms or famous dads. So I think like it's not really that harm is not really exclusive on our side. So I think, well, at least like I think in CG we make sure that that these university will be able to to get the students that will propel them later on in life, right? Now, I think the concern of another concern from the closing opposition is that, these students should be given the agency to choose whatever they want to learn, right? That, well, we think, here's the thing, right? You can still, whatever field you choose, communication law, or engineering, in every single field, there is always a standard that you need to fulfill. There is a certain basic knowledge that you need to know in order to excel, right? That's why we have exams. That's why we also have final projects. So we don't understand on why why setting this standard is so harmful. Like in their case, it's much more harmful, because then what happened is that you have a bunch of university students just enrolling randomly just for the sake of having like a uni name, but then like not really getting the drive to really pursue what it is in their in their field, right? Before that,
if universities don't have enough facilities to prepare their students for the real world, what good does taking away their funding do, and thus taking away those facilities?
Okay, here's the thing, right? Like, I don't understand why, if right now, if they have like this same amount of funding, why is it that they have the freedom to explore? When I think like if they do perform well, then that will motivate them to like explore better, and also like to buy more like laboratory equipment, for example. Like I think this will motivate university later on to really equip their students with what they need to explore, right? Because what happened in your case is that we have a university with a limited amount of funding that will only be used to fund the teacher, that will only be used to fund all the staffs, but then not really addressing of what needs to be addressed, right? Well, I think like in our case, if they already fulfill the performance-based metrics that they have to fulfill, what will happen is that their funding will be increased, right? If they actually perform well. If they perform well, and that funding then will motivate them to make sure that these kids can excel even better, that they have something more to show off to the world, right? Like, oh, my kids or beat cancer and everything like that. So I think like that motivation, and also like equipping the students to explore more, will only happen under our side. But let's say that they do fail. I think that it's fine, because I think that they need to fulfill the basic understanding first through tertiary education. Like they need to make sure that these students can already fulfill the bare minimum of entering the job field, right? Because I think if you are strict, and also you make sure that they at least know the basic level of knowledge first, then they will be able to get the job, and eventually it will increase over time, right? But then you actually equip them with how they can improve and also gain more money in the long run, right? Now, but then moving on to the second issue, right, on how do we break down systematic privilege, I think closing government tried to say that this is our I think the closing opposition tried to say that this is government's fault because it's because these people are scratch that, all good. vote for CG. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Government Whip, for that speech. I call upon the opposition whip to end the debate. Here.
Give me a second. I need to set my clock.
Okay, take your time.
Okay. I have no preferred gender pronouns. I take verbal POIs if that's possible, and my timer starts now. Well, it appears that there are many inconsistencies in the government's debate. First, it being they were opening with the case of corruption. First, corruption needs to be kicked out of this debate because then we can claim that the government is just corrupt as well. Unimportant at best. Let's explain exactly why this example that the government has stated is pretty much irrelevant to our debate. First, they said that they want this motion to pass so that corruption and the usage of funding, which will not be student-centric, such as teachers' dinner parties, as they stated, by doing this motion, it will somehow decrease. And how exactly will it decrease? What you will be doing instead, however, is decreasing the amount of funding that actually goes into students. Because by enacting this policy, enacting this motion, you will be instead focusing more on I'll be taking POIs later. The opposite, because first, how can they ensure that this doesn't happen on their side of the world once more happens? How will they ensure that corruption, that the usage of funding that is not student-centric does not happen once this motion passes? You can't. That's why this should be thrown out. Second, our second rebuttal would be that the closing government stated that the function of education is to prepare them for the world. Well, no, because they are adults the moment they enter uni. They are not teenagers. They are certainly not children. They are already in the real world the second they step into uni. And that's the function of civics. That's the function of personality classes that you take in high school. Those are to prepare you for the future. You are already adults at this moment. Furthermore, what they need for uni is to be scholars, to learn, to research, to find joy in learning, to expand themselves on their knowledge. This is the function of uni, and apparently what the government team has stated is quite the opposite. Furthermore, another inconsistency the government team has made is that in the closing government team, they stated that they are okay with universities being shut down because if they are not, well, up to the goal, up to the standard the government wants them to be. And how exactly are you going to keep these unis that you say are student-centric, are the best? How are you going to ensure that they stay the best if you shut down the unis? If you are okay with the smaller unis, other unis shutting down due to them not being able to fulfill this goal? Because if they were to close, these students that are from these non-student-centric universities will go into these universities that you say are student-centric. And what will happen is there will be overflowing, that these universities will be overflowing with students, and this will result in the quality of education decreasing And once these universities no longer reach this goal that the government upholds, what will you allow them to close as well? And what will be of higher education? I'll be accepting the POI from opening government.
All of CO's capitalistic harms is reliant on the parameter that career is the only parameter. Why does the harms in CO still stand when we've told you acceptance level, program completion, as per the context slides, are also parameters in this debate?
I'll be replying to your POI later, as I am not done with my speech yet. Furthermore, there's another inconsistency that the government team has not clarified. They stated that if said university gets 700%, then they get 7% of the budget. We need further clarification on how these budgets are allocated. As I stated in my first argument, that the opening government is not clear. They did not clarify on how exactly these budgets will be allocated and how exactly their motion will allow them to, in a way, be better than what is already happening in the current world. Another government inconsistency is that they prefer that once students graduate from college, what they're aiming for is for the students to make as much income, as much money as possible. That's what we have gathered from the government team is. And this being said, in the closing government's statement, they said that big universities just that students want to join big universities just because of their prestige and not because of the majors that are available in those universities. That we do not see how this is relevant to this case, as if their whole debate is about students making as much money as possible once they graduate. How is it relevant that we decide where they go to? How is it relevant that we decide what majors they reside in? As if it is their sole goal for students to make as much money as possible. Once these students graduate from these majors that you said they didn't want to major in, they will still go into these fields of work and they will still make money. If that's your concern, then why is there so much inconsistencies in your debate? And that will be all from the government team and from the opposition team.
All right, thank you, opposition whip, for the speech. And that's the end of the debate.